There's usually always one mic that's not switched on, but it's not this one. Welcome, everyone. Let's get started. A warm welcome. The topic of the day is digital approaches to peacebuilding and conflict prevention. My name is Andreas Hirplinger. I'm a researcher here at the Center on Conflict Development and Peacebuilding, and I will be moderating today's discussion. As with many other professional spheres, digital technologies play obviously a considerable role in the everyday work for preventing and transforming conflict in the form of off-the-shelf technologies such as video conferencing platforms, microphones, and fancy backlit screens, as you can see here in this room, but also in the form of very highly specialized technologies such as remote sensing tools or AI-powered social media analytics. And I would think that in a way, digital tech has become so mainstream that we must wonder if it in fact still deserves to be discussed as a separate topic. And while I think at the same time, the field has often looked at digital technologies as tools that can provide solutions for problems that often remain kind of inherently human, social, and political. And this is why this year's digital track has its focus a little bit more on the limits of tech and the limits of innovation. And in the next hours, we aim to contribute to this conversation by asking how, metaphorically speaking, peacebuilding can move beyond the digital. And with that, I don't mean to move past the digital. I don't think that's really possible in terms of like a kind of a time after digitalization. I mean to ask how we can move beyond a mere focus on the digital realm and the negative or positive effects of technologies as tools. And for this, we have brought together a distinguished group of panelists here this afternoon that will share their insights and views. We have to my right, Ms. Aguiveres. She's the director of the UNDP's Geneva office, which links the program's global development work with the many peace-related actors and processes here in international Geneva. And I think in many ways, the UNDP has been at the forefront of innovation and harnessing technology for peace. And while you're leading these processes at the policy level here from Geneva, it's good to know that you also very much have a hands-on experience, if I've been informed correctly, as you started your career, I think, as an ICT communications officer at the UN headquarters. Is that true?
Oh, that was 25 years ago.
Okay, but it's true. Good. Well, as a researcher, I'm proud that we got the facts right here, right? Then we have Anne-Marie Buzatu here to my left. She is the Vice President and Chief Operations Officer at the ICT for Peace Foundation, and you are, by background, an international lawyer, but you also have first-hand experience in the IT sector, having worked as a web developer and database administrator. So don't ask me about my IT background, please. The ICT for Peace Foundation, I think, is one of the oldest initiatives that aim to, at least in Switzerland, that aim to support the development of international policy for the good use of digital technology, and we are very much excited to hear from your rich experience. And then we have Mr. Gilles Cerutti. You are the head of the Swiss MFA's Humanitarian Diplomacy, Peace and Human Rights division, and previously your diplomatic and humanitarian career has taken you to places where digitalization and peace and conflict are very closely interlinked, such as Palestine, Colombo, and not to forget the United States. And then we have one guest joining us online, and that is Honorary Pierre-Philippe Michael, the Undersecretary of the Ministry of Peacebuilding of the Government of South Sudan. Undersecretary, you will not only enlighten us about the challenges of digitalization in the Global South, but also share your insights regarding building effective partnerships, having worked for the South Sudan NGO Forum and many bilateral development organizations over the past decades. And we are thankful for the UNDP South Sudan office for facilitating your participation here today. Before we start off, I'd like to mention that, of course, we have designed the session to be digitally inclusive. If you want to understand how we did this, look up and read my research. And if you have questions, please do submit this via the Slido platform. The link will be displayed, it's displayed here on the right-hand side as a QR code. And please do submit your questions. We will hopefully have time for a good round of Q&A. So let's get this started. And I want to really start with you, Undersecretary Pierre-Philippe, joining us from South Sudan. I've been looking up some numbers. Usually I'm not a fan of statistics, but I think sometimes they can be a good indicator. And according to the ITU, only about 6% of the population in South Sudan have direct access to the internet, for instance, mainly through their mobile phones. And I wanted to put this very simple question to you. Do digital technologies matter at all for peace and peace building in South Sudan? And if so, how do they? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andreas, and thank you to the panelists. We are happy as South Sudan to join this very rich conversation today. Yes, indeed, the digital technology matters, and in the case of South Sudan, we also see what I call the double face of a digital technology that could both build peace, social cohesion, but also fuel, some violent conflict and bloodshed. The double phase of technology in peace building approaches, including how the same technology would be used as a platform for incitement, that especially in a divided communities like ours, the technology could also be used for hate speech and defamation that might lead to violent conflict, and share or fabricated pictures or situation that aggravates the communities against each other. So we see that digital technology could also be used negatively to fuel conflict, especially in a context like ours. Also, we see the very limited digital infrastructure in South Sudan. Also, that, of course, will take some time, given the context of the Republic of South Sudan, the size of the country, and the fact that we are coming from a very brutal war, and also the size of South Sudan, which I would like to describe as the size of Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi put together.
Great, thank you so much for these first impressions. And I think what you are saying is quite interesting. It's striking that apparently technology matters both through its presence, but also through its absence. Well, bringing this to you, Agi, I think the UNDP is Undersecretary. Did you want to add something?
Hello, can you hear me again?
Did it just cut?
I think it cuts.
Okay. So unfortunately, we are experiencing at first hand how difficult it actually is to connect from these places. Would you want to try again, Undersecretary?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, please, continue.
Yes, I was saying in terms of the digital infrastructure in South Sudan, it might take some time, but the lack of it leads to assumptions. It leads to one-sided stories and rumors that could also fuel violence because there is no enough information. Whatever somebody generates and speaks about, the community has no access to that information to make sure that what that individual is saying is important. So there is no, the voices of the accused or people who defend themselves against whatever is raised as a hate speech and so on takes some time. They might confirm the information after a deadly incident has taken place. So we see the lack of or limited infrastructure for digital technology is another problem. I would also want to conclude by saying, we believe that the digital technology in peace building is important, but we want to underline the fact that it's not a standalone tool. And since those are gadgets that are used by human beings and they are not robots that are programmed to do certain activities at a certain time, we want to underline the importance of a human being in the middle of this. How do we focus on that individual as we try to, the use of technology should be to back up. How do we reach out to the individuals themselves, engage with them in peace building, and then the use of technology just, are used as a means to facilitate that. I want to stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We caught you clearly now, which is great because it's really insightful what you've been sharing with us. I think it's quite interesting to see that there doesn't seem to be a linear function between the degree of digitalization and its impact in places like South Sudan. We can see quite a strong impact, maybe because of the absence of technology and the kind of uneven information ecosystem that comes with it. So Agi, over to you. I'd like to hear from you. UNDP works in many places like South Sudan. I think South Sudan is an extreme case, but I think you have many other countries where you have maybe 10, 15, 20% connectivity across the population. How do you tackle the challenge of peace building in such places?
Thank you very much, and I will pick up from where Undersecretary, Honorable Undersecretary Pia left off on two key points, and I start with the last one that you finished with, which is really the importance of a human-centered approach. And we need to make sure that while we're talking about digitalization and digital tools and connecting prevention and peace building with the new technologies and new possibilities that they provide us, we should not forget that we live offline most of our time. And that we need to make the connection between the online and offline solutions. And the second point that I'd like to link to what the Undersecretary was saying, and then I share a little bit more on the South Sudan experience as well, is exactly the fact that, even though, for example, in South Sudan, there is only a small percentage of the population that has access to the internet, and if we look at just general access to electricity, it's a similar picture. Only 3% have access to the grid. So that gives us a setting. But even though this is the case, whatever happens in the digital space, it reaches a certain audience. Just like whatever happens in the offline space, it reaches a certain audience. So I think for us, peace actors, it's quite important that we have the ability to use the same platforms and use the same audience. Otherwise, what we're trying to do is essentially a mismatch. There is a narrative developed to a certain audience on a certain platform, and we're doing a counter-narrative in a different platform to a different audience. So then they're not essentially addressing the issues. So I think that's why it's extremely important to not to discard it just because potentially the reach and access is not the same. Now, just to look at a little bit the South Sudan experience, I want to share an example even in this setting where we have major limitations on access. We have done a challenge with youth, a challenge competition per se with some of the youth. And as a result, we had a lot of good ideas coming through. And one of the experiences that we're having now is using an app that is called Alert Me, which essentially had really to close the gap between the reporting and the response. And if you think about a very remote setting in South Sudan, essentially when you had in the past reporting of certain elements of violence or hate speech or whatsoever, by the time it reached anybody who can respond to it, it had to be documented, it had to be physically taken to Juba, handed it to someone. So in best case, if it was urgent, we're talking a few hours or a week. Now with the technology and with the app that together with the local communities, together with people involved, we have developed, is really an instant alert system. So that requires, of course, to make sure that those who are using it for reporting don't only have access to it, but they know how it works, and those who are responding to it also can interact with such systems. So we worked very closely, of course, with the South Sudan Peace and Reconciliation Commission and with all the actors involved in this. But I think these are the examples that give us the hope that even in settings like this, we can achieve positive outcomes and we can then learn from it. And I think, some of the lessons relate to the process, which is with the involvement of people who are actually experiencing that conflict, experiencing the violence or whatever is their setting on their own skin, and those who are then able to respond to it. So for them to also see what it does when the response is sped up. On the other hand, of course, a lot continues to happen offline, and the Conflict Early Warning and Early Response Unit of the Peace Commission is one of the key entities to coordinate all the functions of the conflict response. So this is also very important that we couple the experience that we're seeing in all of these spaces and address the processes, the actors, and their interactions. And I want to emphasize really the interactions of the different actors. Oftentimes we focus on security forces, response entities in different settings, At the same time, the impact can be much higher when different constituencies, the youth, women, are also involved in the response as well. So maybe I'll stop here and I can come back with a little bit of a broader picture, but just to conclude, I think when we're talking about digitalization and digital tools, we need to make sure that we take the best of it and we link it to the realities on the ground, and we really contextualize it and try to understand where and what we're trying to apply, so that we're not looking at it as a one-size-fits-all that we can just roll out in conflict settings. I think I'm speaking to the converted here. This is not how we deal with peace building.
Thank you very much, and I think what you said is very relevant also actually for our second segment. So you already created a segue for our second segment, which will be about partnerships. And I think the examples that you brought early warning in South Sudan when it comes to crowdsourcing, I think the interesting part of it is actually that not everyone who is part of the crowd has to have connectivity, right? You will link in intermediaries that then collect information from others who might not have access, and of course that creates some also certain dynamics that we need to be aware of. But we'll talk about that a little later. I want to turn to Anne-Marie, and I want to kind of turn the picture a little bit on its head here, talking about cyber warfare, which is kind of the opposite of what we've just discussed. As in, cyber warfare appears something that is highly digitized, and I think the ICT for Peace Foundation was very much at the forefront of trying to regulate the use of internet-based technologies when many of these technologies were still at their infancy. And today, I think the picture is very different. We're looking at a very, very digitized global politics. But we shouldn't forget that cyber warfare, of course, is also related to offline political dynamics, geopolitics, and so on. So my question for you is, and I know it's not an easy one, but how would a holistic approach to preventing that kind of conflict or that kind of violence look like?
Well, if I had a very clear answer on that, I think I would be maybe winning some prizes here. But I think what's important to keep in mind is when we talk about cyber warfare, we talk about technology, these things sound, really, out of the normal, or something that's very scientific, science fiction-y or something like this. But really, I think to more look at it as what is happening and what are these technologies being used for. So first of all, the heart of this is information, as we've been talking about, and it's also very human-centric. There are some new, say, devices that are being used to deliver some kinds of attacks, but these are not wholly different from how we've been using information in the past. They're just maybe faster and they can be spread more quickly and reach a greater audience and community and population perhaps faster. But maybe let's break down a little bit what we're talking about. So cyber warfare doesn't have a clear definition, as far as I know. I think it's been used in many different ways. But if I were to try to define it, I would say it's the use of information communication technologies to carry out some kinds of attacks, which may also support physical attacks, kinetic attacks, but it may also be attacks on a population to kind of bring terror to a population, or to destabilize a population, or even an entity, a government. So this is really broad. But if we try to look at what we're talking about in very concrete terms, we're talking about how these, first of all, so many of our systems are dependent now on these information communication technologies. We need to, and so these can be disrupted by these types of attacks. And then we humans are now very connected to these technologies, so we humans can be disrupted by these attacks and by also the kinds of shares of information. So when I look at this, I try to look at, not to get scared or not to think this is too technical or this is something that's so out of the norm, but actually what is going on and what would we want to achieve in terms of a kind of approach to this? What kind of system are we looking for to have, say, to reduce cyber attacks, to make sure that our systems are more secure, to try to reduce the impacts of, say, weaponized information, information that can really upset the kinds of rumors that we mentioned that are pervasive in many contexts. And then who has the ability to actually mitigate, prevent, stop, reduce the negative impacts of these kinds of attacks. So from that perspective, it really is, the word multi-stakeholder gets thrown around a lot, but it really goes to the kinds of roles and responsibilities that we each have in the internet space and in the interconnected space. You're talking about certainly governments that have real capabilities in this, but they depend largely on private sector actors. You have, of course, developers and academics that are contributing into, developing the technology and also how it's being used and some of the policies around that. And then you have the users, us. We all also have an important role to play because many of the attacks are spread because of our mistakes. So to answer your question, a holistic approach really is, first of all, understanding how we are connected, and it does depend on the situation. Different contexts and different conflict contexts are different in terms of how the population government uses these kinds of technologies and uses information. But then within that understanding and kind of an analysis of the, say, information ecosystem and how it's shared, what we as different actors can do to try to then mitigate those negative attacks, prevent them, inform each other, and look at it as not something new, but something that we really have to mainstream in the way that we approach our conflicts. So, thanks.
Thank you so much. I think, just to comment on this very briefly, I think it might be self-evident if I say this, but the internet is networked, and I think what you're pointing out here is that holistic approach has to be a networked approach where we look at the very different bits that are part of this network, anything from the end user to the social media companies and network providers and so on. We've been front-loading a lot. Now, at the end of the first segment, Gilles, I want to hand over to you and hear a little bit, you've been listening to all of us here, about Switzerland's emerging vision for digital peace building and peace tech. There are a couple of interesting and exciting developments, in fact, here in Geneva and elsewhere in Switzerland when it comes to digital peace building. There is a newly formed Swiss Peace Tech Alliance taking shape, and I think there's been quite a bit of soul searching going on also during the pandemic and after. So against the backdrop of what you've heard here, would you like to describe the vision a little bit and how it can respond to today's challenges? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the colleagues. I think they highlighted well how digital technologies are also changing conflicts. Creating new risk, but also providing opportunities for peace promotion. As Switzerland, we do want to play a bit of a catalytic role in terms of addressing these risks and maybe seizing or harnessing these opportunities. And we're coming from two angles. Switzerland, as you know, is a neutral country that has been active in peace promotion for a long time. So we do have a lot of expertise in this field, but we also are a place for innovation and excellency in terms of science and technology. So these are two assets that we have when it comes to discussing exactly this. So what is this? I'll say a few words about this new Peace Tech Alliance, and I'll start with what is it and why is it innovative? So basically, the idea comes from the PFL, the technical school in Lausanne, and the Graduate Institute in Geneva, and they basically came to us and at the beginning of the journey, and they asked us to support them in their thinking for this alliance. And the goal of this alliance is to identify new challenges and opportunities at the intersection between peace and technology. And what is interesting is that they have a twofold approach. One that we could maybe say is a bit more traditional, which is how can we bring tech solutions for peace? So how can we develop, create innovation or new tools, digital tools, technological tools that can serve peace goals. So this is it's obviously not the only ones who do that, but the idea there is really to start with concrete problems and how can we bring the right people around the table to try to identify solutions, but starting from concrete issues. And the other direction, which in my view is quite new, is how you can bring peace expertise, peace values, peace principles into the design and development of tech innovation. So how do you use the peacemaker know-how when new tech is being developed? How do you promote the development of more responsible technology? How do you ensure that human rights, sustainability, and peace building are taken into account when new tech is being developed? how will this work? I mean, how will this alliance work, and who will be part of it? So it's still in the very beginning, but what is needed is really to create spaces where experts from different fields can meet and exchange. Of course, so it starts with the EPFL and the Graduate Institute, who launched the idea and who are the two engines behind this project, and obviously the expertise of the EPFL in terms of science and technology and the Graduate Institute for social science, international relations and development are extremely complementary. But for this alliance to really be efficient, you need to go beyond academia, and that's I bounce back on what my colleague says regarding a multi-stakeholder approach. Is you really need to bring expertise and views from different angles of society. That's why you bring in the governments, and my government is very happy to be the first one to be associated to this endeavor, both as a donor but also as a state. We can support projects, but we should also bring the views of how governments go about and view these developments. We also need a community of experts, and that's where the Geneva Peace Platform comes in with a huge pool of experts which can act as a sounding board. And other international organizations can join, private sector, civil society. So this alliance is at the beginning, but we're sure it's going to be a very interesting journey. If you allow me, just a couple of more words on concrete avenues that will be explored. So different things are being planned. There will be workshops where experts can meet and discuss on concrete issues, creation of an expert pool, but also annual meetings and tech challenges. But what we really think is important is also that concrete innovative projects come out of this alliance rather quickly, so that we can really show proof of concept of such an alliance. And there's one first project in the pipeline, and it's again very early, but I'll be happy to share a few words about it. And it will be on online political polarization. And so this obviously, I mean, political polarization online and offline fuels conflicts and violence. It's not new, and it's not only linked to digital technologies, but they have added a new magnitude to this issue. So the project will develop a new algorithm that would allow to quantify online political polarization regarding conflict contexts. And this will help, on one end, sensitize the online users to the issue, how the way they're being directed into the internet, and how the content that they view is actually being polarized. So it will increase their awareness. But at the same time, we will also be able to use it to give institutions ways to see how their own algorithms are basically being polarized. So we're very excited about this, and we look forward to having more to report to all of you.
Thank you so much. And I will have to say, as a researcher, I will ask you after this roundtable for negotiated consent to actually study this new algorithm, because I find it very fascinating. I think there is, a big role for technology and as in tools, as in software, to really change some of the kind of harmful political dynamics. But we, of course, will also want to think about the social aspects of it. And I just want to say that here at the Institute, we do have also, I think it will interlink with the Swiss Peace Tech Alliance, the new digital hub, and we will harness every capacities that we have here to also really shed light on the kind of socio-technical aspects of peacebuilding and how in fact end users, but also experts and so on influence digital peacebuilding approaches. So very exciting. I want to move on to the next segment, and before I do this, I just want to say again, do feel free to submit any questions that you have through the Slido platform. Maybe there is already something in there. You have I can see a lot of laptops here, a lot of digital tools. You probably all typing away your notes and your questions, so that's great. Thank you for that. So I want to talk a little bit more about, I think we've already started the conversation, but I want to talk a little bit more about partnerships and the future of peace building that we really see emerging here. And I do want to hand back to Undersecretary Pierre Philippe. We've already mentioned some of the work, for instance, that the UNDP have been doing in South Sudan in terms of supporting these accelerator challenges, bringing local engineers, software designers, etc., on board to look for creative technical solutions to some of the problems that they see in society. I would like to pick your brain a little bit about the potential and the challenges also of leveraging local capacities in this particular context. Everyone talks about localization all the time, but we continue that conversation. So what's really in the way for it to succeed? How can we do this efficiently, and maybe what are the challenges? So over to you.
Yeah, I think in the context of South Sudan, we think it's important to do some more work on innovation challenge platforms. How we have many of our young people who have studied outside there, that have studied computer science, but they don't have enough creative thinking to help them to, come up with how that technology would help them to support their community, to build peace, to do things like that. So I think there is need for innovation challenge platforms, and this is a point where I would like to say thank you to UNDP for the work that that has been done here. I've seen and I witnessed a number of those innovation challenges, including the Alert Me, which now functioning very well, because based on that, it has encouraged and empowered our early warning and early response system. And those apps were developed by a number of South Sudanese. And when they did that challenge, I actually witnessed, I participated, and I saw the level of knowledge that those young people could put across. So really, I think it is important to think around, creating those innovation platforms that would encourage our young people to think outside the box and use the knowledge that they have to support the growth of their communities. And this also, in our case, would promote the African Union Agenda of 2063 with the greater focus on education, science, and technology and innovation. And this is the Africa we want. So the focus on science, technology, and innovation is critical. And I have seen that working in South Sudan with the support of UNDP, especially on that situation room that is located at the Peace Commission office. That's giving us the alert every day across our country, where we have our peace committees. They are able to use the app and pass the message, and then that message is helpful for security reasons, for us to know what's happening across our country. So that's something that really would be very important. Again, I think it is important to incentivize innovation and technology in South Sudan. Because many young people would have ideas, they come up with something. There is a young boy who came up with an aircraft, to build an aircraft, put some batteries, and the aircraft took off and never landed. There is another young boy also who came up with a FM radio station. And so I think what we really need to do is, where this knowledge, we have seen it at work, we need to think around how do we give an incentive to this community, because our environment is not like other environments where you have a laboratory where children can go and play with gadgets and come up with something. But we need to encourage our young people by building such platforms and also giving some incentives for people or young people who would want to take this to the next level. Got you.
Thank you so much, Undersecretary, for these remarks. I think it's quite striking in the context of South Sudan that there is a lot of potential and expertise, I think, that's been building in the region. So you do have, lots of people who've been trained in Kenya, in Uganda, and they're now coming back for opportunities. So I think there is a challenge of also really galvanizing that potential and providing opportunities that are also sustainable, and maybe not only focus on one particular application or initiative, but really like building the longer term kind of digital peace infrastructures, if you wanna call it like that. With that, I do wanna hand back to Agi and maybe just zoom in a little bit on to some of the challenges of doing the kind of digital peace building holistically or comprehensively. I think so we just talked about the local early warning app, where a lot of early warning information is generated, but then it has to be used, right? When we talk about disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech, there's a lot of work happening when it comes to reporting that information, maybe having it deleted, and so on, maybe sensitizing youth about it, and maybe training volunteers to post counter speech. But how really can we reach deeper and address the underlying causes of conflict, and how can this effectively done through partnerships?
Thank you very much. I think that's exactly the core of the matter, because we're talking about hate speech, we're talking about certain narratives out there in the digital and offline space, but we really need to look into why do they hate, and what do they hate, and why they are joining extremist groups, and those who are exiting extremist groups, why are they exiting, what's motivating them to go back. So I think, there are all of these questions and much more than this that need answers, and we can use some of the digital tools to try to get those answers. Of course, we are and other actors as well doing some of the surveys and the studies to understand the underlying issues and causes. But I think the this is where the digital technology can really help, because with artificial intelligence and some other ways of looking at it, the analysis that can be done on the narratives out there is much deeper and much faster than anybody can do with traditional surveys. So we have done a lot of ways of trying to dig deeper here. For example, using gamification for surveys that is much more attractive and much more insightful when it comes to, for example, behavioral changes and behavior kind of analysis that we want to see. We, of course, work a lot with the various actors to try to do the counter-narratives. But for those counter-narratives, you have to understand not just what the narrative is, but what motivates that narrative. So, that kind of leads us to the next layer, which is really the underlying cause of why people are unhappy and how that unhappiness escalates to various aspects, whether it's violent extremism or just simply hate speech. And then we go back to development. So at the end of the day, we are a development organization, and what we see is a lot of it goes back to development. It's poverty, it's corruption, it's abuse of power, lack of good governance, and all of these issues, and sometimes simply just the lack of opportunities, especially among the youth. When they see the lack of opportunities and there's an alternative that offers something compared to nothing, it's those are the issues that we have to address. So then it goes back to development, and it goes even deeper, because then we need to look at places where violence is not yet there, there's no conflict, but we can see that the deep level of development issues could lead to that. So I think that's where we really think that prevention can do much more, not just prevention in already conflict-related areas, but prevention where we see, kind of developing a hotbed for that, but it's not there yet. And we also see through our research, how difficult it is sometimes just to focus on the security-driven approaches, how there are a lot of dissatisfaction with those responses that we're actually, trying to shift and train. So when we look at this picture, it's really going back to your original question, and I think you posed it to Anne-Marie, is what is the holistic approach? And I think the holistic approach is that we need to go beyond traditional prevention and peace building, but we really need to go back to something that is much broader, which is looking at the basic human development of these communities and how we can address those human development issues that will, as a consequence, address, some of the topics that we are discussing. And I think, the multidimensionality of this is just mind-boggling for many of us, because everything is related. So then you get into issues of access to water, then you get into issues of links to climate change and so forth. So that's why I think, when we talk integration, what we mean is we just simply cannot be monodimensional in any sense of the responses and the analysis, and that adds to the complexity. And when we have this level of complexity, that adds to the uncertainty. And when we have this level of uncertainty, then we go a little bit in a vicious circle when it comes to conflict and violence, especially. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think I can probably see something like kind of a digital peace-building, development, humanitarian nexus emerging here.
I didn't want to use the word nexus, but yes, definitely.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, with the term, and that it might be a bit loaded at times, or like a little bit overused. But I think in fact we will need to have that discussion. So here we are. Luckily, we only have about half an hour left here. I want to hand over to Gilles again and ask, just in terms of partnerships. I think you in Switzerland has quite a lot of experience in building partnerships in the digital domain, in other spheres as well. So what really can we what can we learn when it comes to forming effective partnerships and maximizing impact? What can we learn from other fields?
Thank you very much, Andreas. I will just limit ourselves to one example that has been in the field of my team. I mean, there are for sure many others, but I'll just give one concrete example, which is from the humanitarian sector, and in particular from the management of humanitarian data. So it's quite a specific one. I mean, in the humanitarian sector, as is every sector, I mean, new technologies bring both risk and opportunities. For example, in terms of opportunities, there are absolutely many. I mean, new technologies can allow you to bring humanitarian action faster. It can allow you to reach more people and more quickly through digital media. With artificial intelligence or satellite imagery, you can get a better and faster view of what the humanitarian needs are, etc., etc., etc. But you also have risks coming with new technologies, and I'll use the example of management of data. There are many questions that come with it. How do you collect and store the data of the people that you want to aid? How do you make sure that you don't put these persons into more danger by collecting the data? If the data that you collect, is it then safely stored? And how do you make sure that humanitarian workers also know how to collect data and handle it in a safe and responsible way? So there are many questions and many risks linked to these questions. And to address this dilemma of trying to manage both risk and opportunities, so not preventing yourself from using these technologies, so you need to manage the risk. And to do this, we launched an initiative with the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and OCHA, so the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. It's an initiative that we call the Humanitarian Data and Trust Initiative. And there also we used the model of a multi-stakeholder approach. So we had, as you can see, we like these multi-stakeholder approaches. We had humanitarian organizations, academia, think tank, technical providers, government, donors, sitting together. We used the format of Wilton Park discussions in England to see how we can best use new technologies and minimize risks. Together, we developed a charter for the responsible sharing of data between humanitarian organizations, states, and other actors. And I'll just put the point on something that is not going to be very surprising, but that is absolutely key. It's a very simple conclusion that came out during this process, is that, and a few of us have said it already, is that human behavior is really at the center of keeping humanitarian data safe. There are technologies that have data protection by design. They exist, but very often it really is the human behavior that can make a huge difference. I'll give one example. Is we saw that and it's very simple, to keep humanitarian data safe, and therefore to keep the people of whom you take the data from safe is to collect only what is absolutely necessary for a purpose. Because we have a tendency to collect as much data as possible, so in case of, no. Really, the absolute necessary information you collect, and that's it. And that's also a way of minimizing risk. So I think mutatis mutandis, you can develop this also, you can use this also in peace building, I mean, and including in digital peace building. Humanitarian behavior is really at the center of our focus. And we should try to avoid digital solutionism. If we only focus on the digital aspects, we will be missing a huge part of the issue, but also of the solution. And I think this is really a very basic but key conclusion that we all have, and a few of us said it, a human-centered approach, and an approach that includes societal aspects. And so when we developed new technologies, it's really important to bring both the technical expertise, but also the societal, the human side, the social science expertise. And in this regard, and I fall back to my answer to my first question, I think what the Peace Tech Alliance bring is exactly that. It's both the technical expertise, but at the same time this social science expertise and the practitioner approach.
Thank you so much, and there were so many aspects to your comments here. We would really have to have another half day to discuss them in greater detail. But I think a lot of important prompts for us to follow on. And I know a lot of people are taking good notes, and they will shape the sector here in the future from Geneva. Maybe there's a new term, small data is beautiful, or something like that, or little data is beautiful. Maybe that's good to keep. And then I think I just wanted to say that what you've said about the Humanitarian Data Initiative, I think it links very nicely to what we've discussed this morning about both the need to try to regulate the field, but also to really build human capacity to take the right decisions. And that's certainly something, again, where social science and political science and expertise can be beneficial. Now, Anne-Marie, I'm handing back to you, and you're out to win a prize today, you said, right? You wanted to win a prize, so the most difficult question of the day is for you. Should we talk about digital peace building at all after everything that we've said here, or should we come up with a new term, because we might forget about the analog, the offline? How should we talk about building peace in the future?
Well, I do agree. I think we should talk about building peace in the future. Recognizing that now technologies are part of our societies, very much integrated into how we live our lives. And of course, they're different situations, so it's very context specific. But, you know, as was mentioned, even in, for example, areas with low technology infrastructure, nevertheless, technology has an important influence. You have the rumor mills, the kinds of information that are shared in that fast way. But that nevertheless, you need to make the connection to the analog. So I think that's one of the things I want to say is we need to look at this as a holistic system. We need to look how the interfaces between analog and digital are really two sides of the same coin. I know that Fondation Hirondelle, which we work with very much, also has done a lot of work where they have used, for example, technologies and listening to social media to get an idea of what are some of the rumors and things that are agitating the population, and then using radio in contexts where radio really has a lot of credibility and trustworthiness to then send messages to kind of counter those messaging. You know, in terms of data and how it's managed, I also agree that small data is beautiful because we do tend to collect too much information, and we have very little in the way of restrictions, standards, norms for how that information is handled, stored, saved, secured, shared, who owns it, and yet data is now. And this digital data is very important because it's connecting to our personal lives. So again, it comes to that nexus between the human-centric and how we are integrating the use of these information technologies into the way that we're are living our regular lives, our daily lives, and then how these information flows can impact them. So I think that peace building can absolutely benefit from a very, from a conscious and smart use of these technologies. And it's one of the things I think within the peace building communities, we are asking ourselves, where does it make sense? Where do these kinds of technologies make sense and can really help to contribute to peace building? And I I absolutely agree and know that, you know, the use of, say, for AI, machine learning is a way to filter through huge amounts of information to identify patterns that are important, that could be helpful to us when we're, you know, taking these kinds of decisions and trying to work in the peace building world are very helpful, but it's just a tool. It's not going to provide us the whole answer. And again, it's that how do we interface with technology so that we can, you know, we can make really good use of these technologies while keeping in close to home the human aspect of it. So yes, I think peace building is important. I wouldn't say digital peace building as such. I think digital is an aspect of peace building. It's one that we need to learn and think consciously about how to use more effectively, what kind of technologies make sense, and what kind of contexts. There's not one size fits all answer to this, as has been said multiple times. I feel actually like I'm repeating a lot of the same messages, but you know, these are the things I think that when we are going home and we're thinking about how to design a peace process or how we want to interface with certain communities to try to provide good information. Also, the economic context is extremely important, and is really, you know, the way that many of these technologies then can destabilize or influence communities because of perhaps discontent or difficult situations that make them more vulnerable to these kinds of messaging. So when we're looking at peace building and also trying to prevent conflicts, all of these aspects, I think we should not be afraid of the complexity, even though they are complex, but they are really anchored in our humanness and how we use these technologies, how we digest information, how we react. And so if we can really look at it from the human aspect, I think we'll be a little bit, we demystify the whole technology thing and just work towards building greater peace.
Thank you so much. As Anne-Marie said, we're all going to go home tonight and design a peace process. I think that's a brilliant idea. Don't look at what to watch on Netflix. Just go home and design a peace process. I think that if everyone was doing that a little bit more, I think we would make a lot of progress. I think this is a great discussion. I think we're really like moving the field forward. You know, concerns with tech solutionism were announced here. Like a focus on tools is not really always helpful. So maybe we need to talk about digitally aware or technology aware peace building or something like that. We look for a good name. I do want to kind of open the floor now virtually. We have a couple of questions, so if I could have the microphone down, that would be great. And we will. I'm kind of priding myself because we actually have a bit of time left, so we actually can bring, and I think that hasn't happened before. That's why the other roundtable discussion. So we'll have maybe 3 questions at once, and then everyone from the panel can just pick and choose what they want to respond to. Thank you. Sure.
So for the first 3, we have what do NGOs need to be part of the digital transformation and to leverage tech for peace building? Does technology lead to more polarization or does it unite? And what are strategies for building trust around the introduction of new technologies at the community level?
Okay, a lot of quite nitty-gritty questions here. Maybe Agi, something to pick for you, and then whoever else wants to chime in here.
Oh, thanks a lot. So maybe I'll just take an aspect from all of those, which is really about the role of the different actors. Yes, of course, I think NGOs are already very much part of these processes. And I think the most important when we talk about especially the digital tools, digital literacy, is that we do really up the capacities on the ground. I think, you know, this is a bit my pet peeve, is that we have those thinking about the great solutions and those who are living it every day. So somehow, whether they are part of communities or part of the response mechanisms, so somehow we really need to make sure that we bring their ability to learn, not just their capacity of one-time training of a tool, it's their ability to learn, the processes that are available for them to learn and to be part of the solution generation. So I think it's extremely important that we work closely with NGOs and everybody works. And one of the other quick things, we didn't talk so much about it, but I think it's extremely important, is the role of the private sector. And the role of the private sector has different aspects. I mean, from Google, who is now developing all kinds of mechanisms, for example, to identify toxic content to the extent that they can give take it whether it's positive or negative, but they can give immediate feedback to somebody who's typing something on social media that you may want to consider because this is toxic content. And for example, I was just at a workshop before this where they were saying 1 out of 3 people actually change their typing based on that feedback. So this is, one aspect of the private sector who can help with really changing the way we are dealing with it to the level of the private sector on the ground, which is, much more influencing the narrative than many of the other actors who are there. So I think we're underestimating and maybe not leveraging enough the private sector's contributions exactly on around these questions that were posed online.
Thank you. I do want to hand over to the other panelists and also invite Undersecretary Philippia to make any comments if you wish. I think that, if I may, I think the question of the private sector in South Sudan is also quite interesting. I think one of the most profitable businesses, I think, in fact, is telecommunications in South Sudan. This is where you have big companies really investing quite heavily and also producing some revenue. And in fact, it's quite interesting to see that those private sector actors do reach in many corners of South Sudan, whereas maybe state-led or even civil society actors might struggle. So I think it might be it's MTN in South Sudan and the church that reaches almost everywhere, not everywhere, but across the country. I don't know, Undersecretary, if you want to make any comments at that stage.
Yeah, in South Sudan, the private sector, especially in technology, like the mobile phone network and so on, they are trying to regain the ground after the 2013 war. But I think what we are taking away is we need to initiate that type of conversation, just to ensure that the network is not only for just communication, but again, it's also a technology that would promote peace and social cohesion. I think it is important that as a ministry of Peacebuilding, that we share this conversation with the private sector and see how they would be on board. At one point, I had a conversation with Zain, and we wanted to include something in the ringtone. For example, when somebody calls, you say, we are one, or, say something in the ringtone that the other person would, the one calling would hear. So something like that would really promote those jingles that need to be played to encourage social cohesion. I think the point is that we need to initiate a robust conversation around those areas with the private sector here in South Sudan.
Thank you, Undersecretary. And just to contextualize, Zain is another mobile phone provider in South Sudan. And if you haven't done that yet, I would recommend you dial +211 and then a random number and just listen to the beautiful ringtones you will hear, because in South Sudan and many other African countries, people are very creative choosing a ringtone tune. And obviously, maybe that's a micro peace-building effort that could be installed there, basically. Any reflections, Gilles? Anne-Marie, do you want to come in?
Sure. So thank you very much for the question about what do NGOs need to leverage peace building and leverage technologies for peace building. And this is something that's very much a conversation that a lot of us NGOs that are working in peace building are having right now. So I'm not going to give you like a canned answer, but I think that what would be important and helpful is if you join us. This morning, actually, earlier at the Peace Week, we had a session, a workshop on technology and peaceful spaces in technology that contribute to peace. And we want to create a community of NGOs that are working on this so that we can learn together, share good experiences, and maybe co-develop certain things. Certainly, there are possibilities there. So in terms of that, again, it's the network, it's maybe the holistic approach, but we are stronger when we're working together. The question around polarizing tech, is tech polarizing? That's a big question, and it does relate a lot to the private sector. As most of you know, the social media platforms typically have algorithms that really, accentuate or really elevate the kinds of posts that are emotional or that are, people making them upset. So they are organized or kind of developed, they are designed to kind of polarize, to put us into different types of bubbles. They identify our profiles, our likes, our dislikes, who we talk to, what are our political affiliations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in this way, they do polarize. And it's something that we need to be aware of. We have done another study where we look at how commercial actors are using tech in different kinds of services. Some of them quite invasive, something, quite in terms of gathering information about us. And one thing that is clear is that in most jurisdictions, in most places, the limits on, as one company told me, the only limits on tech and how it's used is the budget of the client. So if we really want to look at this from a point of view of how tech is used and what it's doing to us, we need to be aware of it, but we also then need to see how we, as consumers, the kinds of choices that we make to influence this. And then from a regulatory point of view, this is very complicated, so I'm not going to get into it in a detailed way. But also there is certainly an area for government to start to set standards and norms for how data is collected, how it's used to polarize or hopefully not polarize us. And then there were strategies for building trust. Trust building is a very complicated issue in digital spaces. It's something that's really new. So I would just say that we are kind of at the beginning of this. What does it mean to create a space that is trusted? There are a lot of spaces that people trust kind of blindly. Maybe they're, and then we have the polarization that I was talking about in the previous question. And what kind of space you can really feel trust and build trust in, have trusted communications, trusted interactions. I think this is a field that really needs to have a lot more attention. It's also speaking from like a peace building perspective, something that we need to look at working in this space. And so again, if you're interested in this, join our community that's looking at this and trying to create, work together to build peace in this complicated and interesting and amazing space.
Thank you so much, and I think, Anne-Marie, you're highlighting again also the need for new partnerships. For instance, I think we in political science, international relations, for instance, need to work much more closely with psychologists to understand some of the dynamics when people engage online. Just to share like a small anecdote, we had a meeting of the Cyber Mediation Network yesterday, which was, you were there as well, which is where the CCDP is a member, and we had collaborated online for about 3 years and had regular meetings, and I hadn't met some of the colleagues before, and it felt like we had known each other for a long time. And in fact, it was a very cordial meeting, and so I think, and I think that challenges some of the assumptions that we have in terms of the capacity of actually engaging meaningfully online. But very often I think our own behavior might also put some limits, as in multitasking and so on. But Gilles, over to you.
Thank you, and a lot has been said by the other panelists, so I won't be too long. But on the first question on what roles NGOs and in particular local NGOs can play, I mean, I think, and Aggie, you highlighted a few of the challenges. I think, first of all, NGOs and local NGOs need to be involved in the discussion when we develop a new solution. That's what we try to do in this Humanitarian Data and Trust Initiative, is to have at the table also an umbrella of organization that was representing local NGOs to actually point to us the challenges that they face and how much they could actually implement. So really an inclusion, I think, when it's about devising new solution. But it is true that the technical challenges that NGOs face, technical and also human resource capacities challenges that some NGOs face, is an issue when you want to develop new technologies, for example, in the humanitarian sector, and it needs capacity building, and it's a challenge. Do new tech create more polarization? I'll tend to echo what you said. I mean, but it is a very broad question. It certainly challenges and magnifies issues that already exist in the real world, and we hope that the project that we will be developing with the Peace Tech Alliance will bring some answers and more importantly, some ways to address it. And on how to build trust at the community level, I think this is a very interesting question, and And especially in the humanitarian sector, trust really is at the center of the work. Without trust, you can't cross the front lines. You really need to earn the trust of the local population. And I think there, how to build trust, it's almost impossible to build trust just at the digital level. You actually, in the humanitarian sector, you need to go back in the real world, and then you basically, when you want also to use a technical solution in the digital, in the humanitarian world, you need to explain the risk to the population that you want to help. You need to say, I'm taking your data, and I'm going to do this with your data, and these are the risks that are linked to me taking this data, but these are also what you can get out of it. And just one last word on trust. I mean, it takes a lot of time to build, and it takes one incident to destroy. So it's really, especially in the humanitarian sector, it really is something that is quite central. And yes, you need good tech, you need strong tech, but you also need more than that.
Thank you so much, Gilles. I wonder whether we have 5 more minutes, so we could take one more question maybe, and then everyone could have just a last round of reflections.
Sure. This question is actually a really good one to end on. So, as we've been talking a lot about managing the stakeholders in the space, how do we move forward and balancing ethics of the international community as a whole, and also the needs of the multiple stakeholders with the speed with which the technology comes out? How do we make sure that we're not being outpaced?
I think this is a great question, maybe something where everyone can say something about it. I think having studied digital technologies in peacebuilding conflict prevention for a couple of years now, I think what's really striking is that there is so much innovation all the time. And it makes me feel very, very old. I mean, I don't keep up, you know. I'm just 37 years old, right? So in that sense, I think there's a question for all of us, both in research, but also in practice and policy, to engage with innovation in a way that lasts, right? Where our half-time of what we do is not only just 2 years or 3 years, but a little longer. So maybe that's something for everyone to make final remarks on. Just a minute each. How about we start with Agi?
Well, I mean, I don't want to sound very pessimistic on this, but I think it's very difficult to keep up the pace, because the pace out there, we just have to be realistic, is much faster, and we are constantly in a reactive mode. Not just in the area of peace building, but in general, kind of in the digital sphere. So I think one thing to keep in mind, and one thing to address that, is to work with those who are at that pace. So that's why the role of youth and the role of those who are already kind of using these tools on a regular basis for whatever purpose are really in the center of our partnerships. Because otherwise we are just playing catch up and we are becoming dinosaurs by the day, no matter how old we are.
Great. So first strategy is stick with the youth who are at the forefront of innovation. What else do we have to offer?
I agree with what was just said. I mean, for example, as a government, we can't go faster than the technological developments. It will be faster. So I think that the answer is really multi-stakeholder approaches, is be and connect with the actors that are the front line of developing these technologies, in order to or try to anticipate it as well. I mean, in Geneva, there's the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator that really tries to look at what are the risks and the opportunities that are coming. So developing this and putting the right people around the table. Great.
Okay. Second one is networked intelligence. Anne-Marie?
I was going to say that last part, so but that's good. It means that we're on the same page. I think, you know, having something that's anticipating, that's really also looking ahead, what's coming down the pipeline. This is something that we need to integrate more, mainstream it into our governance processes. So I would also say that we need to look a little bit how our governments are designed. They're not always in the right kind of configuration to be able to not just respond quickly to all these changes, but to anticipate and prepare for them. And so to the extent that we can start thinking a little bit ahead of some of these challenges so that we can meet them instead of trying to clean up the mess after something horrible happens, I think that's a new mindset that we need to get into, but it's going to take time, unfortunately, as all of these things do, because we are so ingrained in our current ways of acting and reacting. But if we can really think a little bit ahead about what is coming down the pipeline, and then build that into our governance program, processes, I think this is a way also to try to balance those and get ahead of the negative impacts.
Thank you so much. So the third one is anticipation. And now to wrap up, Undersecretary, if you have any closing remarks for how to stay ahead, and I think like bringing this question to South Sudan, I think strikes me as very important, because obviously maybe one doesn't always feel like one is ahead or with time in South Sudan, given the long history of violence and colonialism and global injustice that have made it so difficult for South Sudanese to be in their time and be prepared for the future. So, any closing remarks for us? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think some scholars say that we are living in post-human era. That a lot of things are moving very fast, and I'm sure the technology is moving very fast, and it will be very difficult for us to really keep pace with that. But I think what really needs to happen is to have a focus on basic human development needs, because then you look at what is the problem, what is the negative part of technology, what impact does it have on communities, on society. Basically, it's about agitation, it's about good governance, about basic services, about access. So I think the world should be thinking more on the critical basic human development needs. And that can only be the way that we can have a stable system, a stable country, a stable society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Undersecretary. So the fourth one is staying with the human needs, because they might be the same in the future as they are now. Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much all for a great roundtable discussion. Thank you, Undersecretary, for joining us remotely. Gilles, Anne-Marie, Agi, thank you for a great discussion. We have a couple of online meetings in the afternoon. I hope you can join them. I hope you have been shortlisted. And else we will continue the discussion here in Geneva and elsewhere across the Swiss Peace Tech Alliance and in other locations. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.